Welcome to this brief introduction to Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, or what we refer to simply as OBIEE. We're going to take a look at OBIEE from the standpoint of different types of people who interact with the product: developers, managers, analysts, and so forth, folks who work with OBIEE in one way or another. We're going to learn about the major functionality that OBIEE provides to us, and even a little bit about how that functionality comes into being. The data that you'll see today is student enrollment data for an imaginary institution called Maverick University. We're using a training schema that we've prepared specifically for our higher education customers. So if you need OBIEE training and you want to learn on data that looks something like data related to a university, then we've got that available for you. We're going to talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of working with the product. So why OBIEE? Why this product? And in fact, why BI? Why do we need business intelligence at all? We'll talk about who interacts with OBIEE. Who in the organization has some sort of interaction with OBIEE? What do they do with OBIEE? What's the nature of that interaction? What are their responsibilities? When does that interaction take place? When during the project? When during the working day? Where does that interaction take place? Do you need a browser? Is there some special software? And finally, how do they perform that interaction? And we'll do a couple of demos along the way here. So why business intelligence? Why do we need it? And for that matter, what is business intelligence? Well, my definition of BI doesn't start with the data, and it doesn't start with the system, but it starts with a mindset. Business intelligence is the result of a mindset that requires us to figure out the really important things that we need to measure in our organization, the things that are going to determine whether or not we succeed and to what degree. So we might measure our sales or our profit. In the case of higher education, we're going to want to measure our enrollment, trend that over time. We might wish to keep track of our employee turnover ratio, or the number of accidents, or the number of CPE credits that our employees have taken. Whatever it is that's important to the organization, those are the things that we need to measure. And just as important as measuring those things is setting the goals for the things that we want to measure. And by defining those goals, we can determine how well we have attained those goals, how well we've performed in regards to those activities, those measurements that are crucial to our success. So why OBIEE? How is OBIEE going to help us achieve our goal of delivering business intelligence to the organization? We already have Excel spreadsheets that pretty much give us what we need, right? So what's the big deal? Well, the answer I give to my classes is that OBIEE provides us with a tool for creating clean, consistent data that gives us the same answer, the same correct answer every time, no matter who's doing the answering. It's not just some hodgepodge of disjointed, disconnected data that's in a spreadsheet somewhere on somebody's desktop. The data has been carefully selected, it's been carefully vetted, it's been processed with ETL, and it's been carefully tested to make sure that we're getting the right answers every time we ask a question. It's also consistent. We're trying to achieve a term called one version of the truth, so that no matter who we ask the question of, we get the same answer. So let's begin our look at OBIEE from the very beginning. I'm going to lead you on a tour through all of the major pieces of OBIEE, and for each piece we'll take a look at who is typically involved and when and how and what they're doing. We'll start from the beginning, and we'll take the viewpoint of someone who's responsible for the initial installation and configuration of OBIEE. So the what here is we're installing and configuring OBIEE. Who's involved with that? Well, we have some system administrators who are involved with that. The installation will happen during the initial stages of the process, but there are also some ongoing responsibilities as well. It'll happen on one or more of our servers. In fact, it's very typical for us to have a three-tier dev, QA, and prod setup, so we'll have multiple servers. And the interaction is going to be in various ways. Command line, some browser, some text editor. The first step, the what, is the initial installation and configuration of OBIEE. Installation of the entire OBIEE system takes about an hour and a half or so just for the basic install, and there can be a good amount of organization-specific configuration after that. So in the interest of time, we won't be doing that as part of today's demo. After the installation, DBAs are typically going to have a few additional responsibilities from time to time. For example, it's typically our admin folks who are going to apply patches to the software. We might need to tweak configuration settings here and there. Now, when I say that this is a system administrator or a DBA responsibility, I'm really using that term only in the context of the OBIEE project itself. In your organization, installing the software, applying the patches, might truly fall into the realm of a traditional DBA, but for an OBIEE pilot or prototype system, the OBIEE project team itself might have its own physical hardware environment, maybe a virtual box that's self-contained, and a self-contained project team to go along with it. So really, instead of saying this is a DBA activity, the installation and patching just needs to be performed by someone who's willing to take on those responsibilities within the project. So we've installed the software, we've applied the most recent patch set, and we're ready to start using OBIEE, right? Well, not exactly. Because installing our software does give us a framework that we can build on, but we haven't yet configured OBIEE to know about our databases, our data sources, our organization. And if you already have an OBIEE, an Oracle Business Intelligence Applications system that was delivered with eBusiness Suite or PeopleSoft, you do already have a good starting point. But even that is going to require some modifications, some enhancements to the delivered system. So whether we're starting from scratch or if we're starting with the product already partially configured via OBIEE, either way, we're going to need to bring our OBIEE metadata repository into the picture. So building the metadata repository, who does that? Well, now we're going to take the viewpoint of developers. The process of developing the metadata repository is really continuous. It really never stops, and we use a Windows client tool to help us achieve that. The metadata repository is a transition layer that connects our physical data sources and presents us with a view of our organization. We'll have one or more repository developers who find or they request the appropriate database tables, columns, maybe from tables in our transactional databases that have been run through a transition process called ETL, extract, transform, and load, and they've been provisioned for use in OBIEE. This is typically a continuous process. There's no way that we're going to know 100% of what we're going to need forever and ever, amen, when we start the project. So the development of the metadata repository is an ongoing experience. So why? Why do we need this at all? Well, our goal here is to provide our users with very clearly defined business definitions. For example, what do we mean when we say revenue? Do we mean revenue of dollars that came in, or do we consider returns that people brought back to us? What's the definition of a full-time equivalent student? Campus-wide, we may have a dozen different definitions of full-time equivalent student. Well, as part of the OBIEE development team, we're going to facilitate agreement on one meaning of that term, talk with the different constituencies, help the organization decide on one definition for one term. And then it's our job as developers to bring those ideas to bearing by delivering a BI system to the organization. Now, first of all, who is it that's going to serve as a metadata developer? Who should be on the project team? One of the things that I really like about an OBIEE project team is that ideally it's cross-functional. We'll have some technical folks from IT, we'll have some operational folks from the business side of things, and during the course of the project, both sides learn more about the company. The operational folks gain an understanding of the databases and what's in them. IT learns more about the business itself and how all of IT's carefully crafted schemas and tables and columns are used in the organization to help business measure its performance. The linchpin that ties all of that together is the object that you see on your screen now. It's known as the OBIEE metadata repository, and it's being displayed here in the Oracle BI administration tool. Now we have a lot of different potential sources of data out there, several potential types of data, a lot of different formats, and we need to pull all of them together into one consolidated model. And that's what OBIEE does. That's its reason for existing. OBIEE can point to multiple data sources, multiple storage formats, different levels of granularity, all of them serving different purposes, and consolidate them into a single, coherent, selectable model with one presentation interface. That's going to give us one tool to learn as users and a single point of interface for all of our data and all of our analysis needs. And the starting point for all of this is that metadata repository that you see on the screen. Reading from right to left, we're going to start with the physical layer and go to the business model and then go to the presentation. So it's in the physical layer over here on the left-hand side that we'll identify all of our different data sources. For example, maybe we've got a data warehouse on our Oracle 11G database on one of my servers with schemas and tables that have been run through an ETL process specifically to configure the data for OBIEE. I've got a couple of schemas like that right here in my Oracle database. I've got one for my regular non-higher ed classes called RetroTrain, and another one called MavU, Maverick University, for our higher education classes. But we might want to connect directly to our PeopleSoft system or to an Oracle e-Business Suite system to provide some drill down to detail capabilities so that we can see our detailed transaction level data. Maybe that data is held in a different database, something other than Oracle, Teradata, SQL Server perhaps. Maybe we also do some budgeting or some forecasting, and we use Hyperion Essbase in some manner to help us keep up with that. Maybe we have some demographic information that comes from a third party that we use to help us target potential students, and that data is provided to us in an XML format or maybe a simple CSV, comma-separated value file. So a lot of different potential sources of data out there, several potential types of data, a lot of different formats, and we pull all of them together with this administration tool to build the repository. Now, there is one really important thing that you need to know about OBIEE. OBIEE isn't a data storage tool, and it's not an ETL tool. The E in ETL means extract, and OBIEE cannot extract anything. We never physically move or physically replicate data out of a source system and store it in OBIEE. OBIEE doesn't even have any place to store data. Instead, whenever we log into OBIEE and we ask for some information, that data is pulled directly from the source system in real time. So we're going to always see the most up-to-date information available from those systems. So that's what the physical layer is all about. We're connecting to multiple data sources. We're identifying the data that we want from each of those sources. The middle layer, this is called the, the business model and mapping layer, and that's where we'll convert all of these different sources of the data into one consolidated model. So imagine a scenario with me. we've captured our actual enrollment in our PeopleSoft system, and we've consolidated that into our data warehouse. We also have our planned enrollment that we produced over in Essbase or maybe Hyperion Planning. So, I'm a financial analyst. It's the most natural thing in the world for me to say, show me a column that has my actual enrollment. So right here we're looking at our enrollment for the 3 terms of 2011 broken down by educational division. Okay. Next to that, show me a column of the planned enrollment. Well, that came from Essbase. Now show me the variance. Actuals are in an Oracle database. Budgets are in Essbase, and those two systems don't talk to each other. They can't. Now, with our human brains and with our knowledge of the organization, we know that actual enrollment out of data source A and planned enrollment out of data source B, they really represent the same business concept. We know that they're just 2 ways of looking at the same idea. So identifying those business concepts in this middle layer, we can point to and we can merge multiple data sources that represent this concept, this business concept that we call enrollment. So if I point to a particular column from the Oracle database over in the physical layer, I can tell it that it should contribute to the business concept called actual enrollment. Same thing from an Essbase source. I can point to a column in Essbase and identify it as pertaining to the business column, business concept called planned enrollment. So different columns coming from completely different data sources can represent the same business concepts. And now our actual enrollment and our planned enrollment just become 2 selectable columns in our finished model. And we can also derive other columns from those, like enrollment variance. We're computing that on the fly. It's the percent difference between actual and budget. So the percent variance column doesn't have to exist in either physical source system. It's derived at runtime completely within OBIEE. So this middle layer, this business model and mapping layer, and sometimes we refer to it as the logical layer, it's going to do all of the conversion for us, all of the mapping from physical objects to logical columns. I like to think of the business model layer as the CFO view of the organization. The CFO might be aware of the fact that we have a lot of different databases, a lot of different sources of data, but the structure of those databases isn't really of deep importance to the CFO. The CFO just wants to see actual enrollment, planned enrollment as business concepts, and the CFO really doesn't need to worry about where those things come from. The presentation layer over here on the left side of the screen is just how we want our users to see these logical objects, different folder names, different columns in a particular order, things like that. This is where we create our pretty presentation for our users. It's something that makes it easy for them to find what they're looking for. And finally, the repository developers are also tasked with building security rules. All security in OBIEE is assigned to users at runtime, login time, and it's based on the roles that a user belongs to. And there are 3 types of security that we're able to apply in OBIEE. The first of those is data security. When you log in, what data are you allowed to see? Are you one of the 3 people in the organization who can even see that a field called salary exists? Or do you work for a particular school or division within your university, and maybe you can only see data for that organization? Our data security roles are typically operationally based. Where do you work? Second type of security, functional security. This is what I like to call the what can you do in the system. Are you someone who can create new reports? If so, you're someone that we probably call an author. Or you might be a member of the consumer role, so that you can only view results shown on reports or dashboards that other people build. So functional security, what functional privileges have you been granted? And third is catalog security. If you work in the registrar's office, can you run reports that are stored in the athletic department folder? So catalog security has to do with not just what you can do, but where can you do it. If you can run reports from the athletic department folder, can you change them? Can you save new reports into that folder? That's catalog security. And again, typically, that's going to be based on your organization within the bigger organization. So the three layers of the repository plus data security represent the majority of what developers do. And in practice, catalog security can actually be delegated to other folks, maybe one master security person in each department. So for right now, we're finished with our developers. They've finished the repository, we've applied some security, and finally now we're ready for some users. So what is it that our users see? How do we use OBIEE to create reports and graphs and pivot tables and all sorts of other objects that allow us to effectively analyze our performance as an organization? Well, let's look at the product now from an author's point of view. Authors examine organizational results, financial results, operational, and with the ad hoc reporting, we're analyzing those in kind of a structured fashion. You can do that 24/7 because all you need is a browser and a running system. And we're actually creating ad hoc queries, maybe key performance indicators, different types of structured financial reporting. Now, when I use the term author, I'm typically referring to someone who creates reports about organizational performance, and perhaps they analyze the results themselves or they make those results available to other people. So let's take a look then at the browser environment for Oracle Business Intelligence. The browser screen that you're seeing right now is the front page. It's the landing page for an OBIEE system. This is what our users see when they connect to OBIEE. The other screen that we were looking at, the repository, that's only for system developers. Ordinary users don't see that set up at all. They come to a browser and they're able to see folders that they can drill down on, columns that they can select, and so forth. So let me create a very simple analysis here out of my Maverick University subject area. The data that we're going to be working with today is enrollment data. So if you were to ask me, what's our total enrollment? I could come over here, grab total enrollment, and say our total enrollment is 75,116. and you might say, wait a minute, that can't be right. We don't have that many students. What number is that? Well, that number, that one number on the screen, represents our total enrollment that we've ever recorded in the system since we started the university a few years ago. So my answer was correct, but it was also totally useless because I didn't provide any breakdown of that data. So maybe you say, well, can you maybe break that down for me by term, by semester? Yeah, of course we can do that. I can pick up term and bring it over here and break that 75,000 number up into each semester. Give me a list of all semesters. That process, that breaking down a large number into smaller pieces, is called dimensionalizing the data. So at this point in the discussion, we've got a one-dimensional data set. Enrollment broken down along one dimension, term. Okay, so you're not displeased with that, but you'd like a little finer breakdown. You'd like to see perhaps each term separated into numbers for each one of our educational divisions, or maybe drill on down into the schools within each division. And let's go ahead and break it down a little further. Maybe we've got a breakdown by degree plan. How many undergrad, how many masters, doctoral. However fine-grained we want to break down that 75,000 number, as long as we have the dimensional information to support it, we can split it into 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, as many dimensions as we want. Break it down into a really fine grain, but we'll always retain the ability to aggregate it back up to the highest levels. And then finally, I want to put a little filter on this analysis just to see school years 2010 and 2011. So I think I'll grab my school year column here and just select a couple of years that I'm interested in at the moment. How about 2010 and 2011? Now, as you watched me create that analysis, all you saw was numbers in a table. But OBIEE has a really rich feature set of a lot of other analysis tools that you can use. Let's take a look at one or two of those. The first tool I'm going to look at is a pivot table. Now, a pivot table is very similar to a table, but it gives us a lot more capabilities. So maybe instead of just having a set of my degrees going down the page, maybe I want to see them going across. So I'll just pick up the degree tile right here, drag it over to the columns area, and you see my little blue drop line there. Just drop it. And I'm going to keep bouncing my layout on and off the screen so you can see the progress as we go. So my 3 degrees are going across. What if I want a total of all of those? Well, let's put a column total before all of my columns. And now you can see that we've got total enrollment there. What about a subtotal after each term? Well, let's put a subtotal here associated with the terms. Okay. Let's see, I've got each division coming down the page. What if I wanted to see each division in its own specific section? Well, I could pick up the division tile, bring it up into the sections zone, and when I do that, now I've got one zone for each of my divisions: arts and humanities, business and communications, sciences, and so forth. What if we wanted to be able to select individual divisions one at a time from a drop-down list? We can do that. Let's pull division up here into our pivot table prompts. And now we've got the ability to choose arts and humanities, sciences, our 4 different divisions here at Maverick University. Hey, what about a grand total down at the very bottom? Well, we can do that with the little rows summary. So a lot of different flexibility that we have with our pivot table. And we're not limited to just one. We can create as many different pivot tables as we need, as many different types of views as we need for a single data set. So as many different graphs, gauges, narratives, funnel charts, whatever we need. Now we're going to keep working with this same set of data, this same criteria set. We went out and got data. We created a new pivot table. I think I'll remove the large table from this consolidated layout and maybe put the pivot table over there. So what are some other things that we can use? Well, how about we build a graph? Let's take a look at a graph. I'm going to create a new graph bar. I'm going to create a new vertical bar graph. Now, when we start a graph, OBIEE doesn't have a clue of knowing what columns we want shown where. So initially, a graph is really kind of messy. We've got to tell OBIEE where we want everything. For example, I want my schools within the divisions going across the page, across the bottom of the graph. So I'm going to leave school right where it is, right here in the group by horizontal axis area. I want one colored bar for each one of my terms. So I'm going to pull term down here into the very color by horizontal axis area. And then temporarily, I'm going to exclude my divisions. I'll just pull it down here and exclude it. I like calling it, taking it into timeout. And I'll also exclude my degrees as well. So what do I have so far? What does it look like? Well, I've got all 6 of my time periods, and I've got all of the different schools for all 4 of my divisions. Okay, well now what if I wanted to select my divisions separately like I did with the pivot table? It's actually really simple to do that. The same technique that we used with the pivot table, we can use with our graphs. I can pick up my divisions, pull it right up here into my graph prompts, and now I've got a selection list that I can choose from that will let me choose sciences or let me choose technology and the schools within those particular divisions. Or how about this? This is a neat new feature in Release 11. How about showing the divisions as a slider? So we have business communications, we have sciences. So instead of a drop-down list, we could show those as a slider. Now, there's another cool new feature in 11G called Master Detail Interaction that I want to explore a little bit with you. I'm going to create another table view. Just like I created a pivot table, created a graph, I can create another table view of the data. And the only column that I want in that view is just division. I'm going to pull all of the other columns down here into the excluded zone. So just division, only one I want there. And I'd like to make it possible to, there we go, I'll put him right up there. I'd like to make it possible for me to click on one of the names of the divisions and have my graph and have my pivot table respond to it. Let's see, I'm going to slide my graph right up here next to that table. There we go. I want to click on one of these divisions and make the graph and make the pivot table listen for that click. So over in my criteria tab, I'm going to change some of the characteristics of my division column. I'm going to talk about the interaction for a moment. When my user clicks on one of the values in the column, I want to create what's called a master detail event, and I'm going to call this just my div. I get to make up the name there. So I've clicked on a word, clicked on one of the divisions, and it's going to get saved under my div. I'm going to go ahead and save this, by the way, before I lose something. I'm going to call this, tell you what, how about if I save this in a shared area where I was working before. I'll save this as enrollment by school. There we go. And then to make each of these 2 other views respond, I'll change some of the properties of the views themselves. So I'm going to ask the graph to listen to the My Div channel and make sure that whenever I click on one of the values in the division column, it listens. I'll also ask the pivot table to do the same thing. Pivot table, listen for clicks that fill out something in the My Div channel, so that when I click on sciences, I see sciences in my graph, in my pivot table. Arts and humanities, same thing. So really cool new feature in OBIEE 11G. It's called Master Detail Linking. Now, when I put this analysis on a dashboard, maybe I want my users to have the opportunity to select a particular school year that they're interested in. For that, I'll want to create a dashboard prompt, but I'll also need this analysis to respond to that dashboard prompt. So I'm going to make one addition to my filter. I'm going to put in a very simple condition for my school year column that says school year is prompted. It means it will respond to a dashboard prompt. So the next thing I need to introduce to you is an object known as a dashboard prompt, a way for our users to interact with the data in that analysis when we put it on a dashboard. So I'll set up a new column prompt for my school year column. That's the one I want my users to be able to select. And let's see. I'll let them select all values if they want to. They can select multiples. Let's see, I may assign it a default, a specific value, or some sort of system default value that would make more sense as we move through time. So pretty easy for me to create just a simple selection list of school years. I can give that a save, and I'll call that my SY prompt. And when I go to my dashboard, this is the one place where I've cheated a little bit. I've already loaded up the dashboard. One thing I can do with my prompt that I can't do in Release 10, I can actually remove the Go button so that when I make a change, it will go ahead and fire off that change. So I've already placed these objects on my dashboard. And so we can see that I'm interested in school year 2011, which includes the summer and fall of calendar 2010 plus the spring of 2011. And I could add more time periods if I wanted to. Where am I right now? Sciences. I want to go to Sciences, Business Communication. So you can see that we can put things on a dashboard and give our users the capability of interacting with the dashboard. Now those tools are great, but what if you need something really custom? Think with me for a minute about an invoice or an insurance form or maybe a transcript, a student transcript, some sort of output in which we need to put very specific information in very specific places on the printed page. The ad hoc environment really isn't suited for that. Instead, we're going to bring into the picture another piece of the puzzle called the, in formatted reporting, we're going to be able to publish our results in some formats that are more asymmetric, not the highly structured stuff that you saw there in the ad hoc. Our analysts or our authors do that, again, 24/7. Can work in a browser, but to create the asymmetric output formats, we're going to work in either Microsoft Word or Adobe Acrobat using a portion of the product called BI Publisher. So let's take a look at what one of those templates would look like. The most common tool that we're going to use for creating our publisher templates is just plain old Microsoft Word. Oracle has provided us with an add-in for Word that allows us to connect Word to Publisher and basically talk between the two of them. Publisher provides the data. Word is going to provide the pretty picture formatting. So you could think of a Publisher template as the equivalent of a mail merge document in Word. You've got a data source with rows and columns. You have a formatted document like a collection letter, or again like a transcript or purchase order. So this is an example of a fairly simple BI Publisher template that's going to create an unofficial student transcript. The gray shaded areas are fields that are coming in from the data. So this one's going to be our student ID. Here's a looping mechanism that lets us loop over each student and so forth. We built this thing using ordinary Word techniques. We added Word tables. We added fields from the mail merge database. We applied formatting. We might need page numbers, page breaks, headers, footers, just all of the absolutely ordinary stuff that we do with Word every single day. But it's what we do with those Word templates after we're finished with them that's special. Because we can take our pretty picture templates and we can upload them to make them part of the OBIEE system, part of the BI publisher right up on the server. And we can see them in the browser. As a matter of fact, if I show you what this transcript would look like, all of this gobbledygook over here would end up looking like, here's our header, here's who the transcript is for the individual terms, having a cumulative amount coming out here. So some sort of a custom format, not a pre-planned, pre-canned format. Now, Publisher will even allow us to distribute these reports via email, maybe put them on an FTP server, make them distributable via a scheduler. So Publisher gives us the ability then to do more formatted, highly formatted reporting. So those are the two major players for our authors. We've got the ad hoc environment, and we have BI Publisher. So we've talked about our DBAs, talked about the folks who install the software, the developers who create the repository, the authors who create new reports, and so far we've been dealing with folks who are actively creating something, actively contributing to the building of the system, building of the reports. So let's move on to our last group of participants in the OBIEE experience. And for that, we're going to talk then about our, wherever they are, our consumers. Our consumers are a group of folks who generally just view organizational results using tools that other folks build. Call those consumers. They just need a browser, and typically they're going to be looking at dashboards, the object that I showed you a little while ago. So our consumers may be analyzing data, but perhaps they aren't actively creating anything. A good example of a consumer in your organization might be a student. Students who can log on and maybe print one of these transcripts. Somebody else creates the transcript template. The student just logs on, can see it, download it, print it. Maybe the senior leadership of the university who come in the morning and they'd like to just open a web page and see how much progress we've made in our current capital campaign. So someone else creates the report, they just open up a web page and view it. So those are the types of folks that we call our customers. So that's what you have, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of business intelligence, Oracle Business Intelligence from the viewpoint of several different constituencies. The data that you've seen today is our enrollment data. It's a training schema that we prepared specifically for our higher education customers. So if you need OBIEE training, if you want to learn OBIEE on data that looks like something related to a university, we've got that available for you.